Every healer carries a secret wound. Carl Jung documented many cases so dangerous that it shook even him. The moment when the healer's own pain turned against them. He called it the most perilous transformation he had ever witnessed. Because when the wounded healer breaks, they don't just collapse. They awaken. And what emerges isn't the gentle guide you once knew, but a force that can heal with terrifying precision or destroy with equal power. The most dangerous individuals are not those who openly seek power, but those who carry wounds so deep they devote their lives to healing others. He called this the archetype of the wounded healer, the doctor who became a physician because of their own sickness, the therapist who chose their path after surviving trauma, the friend who is always there to help because they know the agony of having no one. At first glance, these people appear selfless, almost saintly. They absorb the pain of others with quiet patience. They guide, they comfort, they sacrifice. And society praises them for it. But Jung saw something underneath the surface that most people missed. Every wound carried in silence is not erased. It is stored. Every unspoken grief, every sleepless night spent tending to someone else's suffering, leaves a mark in the healer's psyche. However, the very wound that gives them the ability to heal is also the crack that threatens to break them. Jung wrote in his private notes that the healer is both the medicine and the wound, both the sanctuary and the battlefield. And when that battlefield grows too bloody, something inside them shifts. Once, Jung documented case after case of men and women who entered therapy not because they could not heal others, but because they could no longer heal themselves. They gave away every fragment of strength they had, and when nothing was left, the mask of the healer collapsed. Patients who once radiated calm and compassion arrived at Jung's clinic in Zurich, hollow-eyed, trembling, their voices carrying the weight of decades of suppressed agony. These people were not broken in the ordinary sense. Their breakdowns weren't the slow unraveling of fragile souls. They were eruptions, explosions of psychic material that had been carefully contained for years. The wounded healer doesn't shatter like glass. They rupture like a dam, releasing everything they've absorbed, not just their own pain, but the pain of everyone they ever tried to save. And Jung asked the question that haunted him. What happens when the healer, the one who held everyone else together, is the one who finally breaks? Jung's notes describe a chilling consistency in the stories of these wounded healers. They weren't merely exhausted or burned out. What he observed went far deeper. The pattern was always the same. Years, sometimes decades, of relentless giving. They became the confidant, the caretaker, the rescuer. They carried secrets that would have destroyed others, quietly holding them like priests in a confessional. Jung described the breaking of the wounded healer as a reversal of energy. The same force that once drew in the suffering of others suddenly turns outward. Instead of taking on more weight, they begin casting it off with ruthless efficiency. People who had leaned on them for years are cut loose in a matter of days. Long ignored truths are spoken aloud with startling calm. Entire family systems collapse, not because the healer sought revenge, but because they stopped carrying what was never theirs to hold. One of Jung's patients, a woman who had served as caretaker to an alcoholic husband and 2 unstable siblings, reached such a threshold. For decades, she had been the reliable one, the bridge between family members who couldn't even speak to each other without a fight. When she broke, she didn't scream. She withdrew, She left letters instead of arguments, each one a quiet but undeniable account of what she had endured. She walked away with nothing but a suitcase. Within weeks, her family dynamic imploded. Jung wrote that it was not her absence that destroyed them, but the sudden vacuum of responsibility. The healer's departure forced everyone else to confront the weight they had once offloaded. This was the revelation that disturbed him. The healer's breakdown is never confined to themselves. It ripples outward, reshaping entire systems. What looks like collapse is actually a redistribution of power. The healer doesn't just stop playing their role. They remove the scaffolding that kept dysfunction standing. And once the structure falls, there is no rebuilding it the same way again. Jung noticed that the wounded healer rarely unravels because of exhaustion alone. Fatigue they could endure. Sleepless nights, endless demands, even the silent ingratitude of others. These were the familiar landscapes of their lives. What finally broke them was something far sharper. Betrayal. Not just any betrayal, but betrayal by the very people they had given everything to protect. Jung's journals describe a pattern that repeated itself with eerie consistency. The healer could endure strangers dismissing them, acquaintances mocking them, even colleagues undermining them. But when their sacrifice was met with deception from their inner circle, a spouse's infidelity, a child's rejection, a patient's manipulation, the mask of resilience shattered. One case Jung recorded involved a physician who had built his entire identity around saving others. He volunteered in the war zones, treated patients without pay, and nursed his family through repeated illnesses. He was revered by his community as a man of almost saintly patience. But when he discovered that his closest friend, someone he had trusted with his deepest secrets, had been exploiting his generosity for years, something inside him cracked. Jung expected despair, perhaps anger. What he witnessed instead unsettled him deeply. The doctor became silent. Not the silence of resignation, but the silence of finality. Within weeks, he resigned from his hospital post, ended long-standing friendships, and moved across the country without explanation. Those who had once leaned on him found themselves abandoned, bewildered, exposed. Jung noted that he hadn't lost compassion entirely, but he no longer distributed it freely. It had become selective, sharpened, reserved for those who truly valued it. This is what Jung identified over and over again. The breaking of the wounded healer doesn't unleash chaos. It unleashes clarity. The healer finally sees what they had been refusing to acknowledge, that their loyalty had been misplaced, that their sacrifice had been exploited, that their care had been taken for granted. And once this recognition settles in, there is no going back. What terrified Jung wasn't the anger of these individuals, but their calm detachment. They didn't need to shout, accuse, or demand repayment. Their absence was enough. Like pulling the keystone from an arch, their quiet withdrawal caused entire relationships, sometimes entire families, to crumble. The breaking point revealed a truth Jung found both beautiful and dangerous. When the wounded healer finally turns their gift inward, when they stop giving it all away, they become unshakable. They no longer patch broken systems. They let them collapse. And in that collapse, the healer is reborn, not as a martyr, but as something far more formidable. When Jung followed these cases beyond the breaking point, what startled him most was not the personal transformation of the healer, but the chain reaction it set off in their surroundings. The wounded healer's collapse was never private. It was systemic. Families, workplaces, even entire communities shifted when the healer withdrew from their old role. For years, these individuals had functioned as stabilizers, invisible supports that kept fragile structures standing. They were the mediators in family feuds, the emotional anchors in chaotic relationships, the colleagues who absorbed everyone else's stress to keep the system running smoothly. Once they stopped, the hidden imbalance surfaced. Jung described households that quickly descended into open conflict after the healer left, because the person who used to absorb everyone's hostility was no longer there. Siblings turned on each other. Marriages unraveled. Parents who had relied on their child's caretaking were forced to face their own dysfunction directly. In professional settings, the impact was just as dramatic. Jung recorded how a nurse's quiet refusal to keep overextending herself triggered an exodus of other staff who had also been silently exploited. Her transformation acted like a mirror, showing others the cost of their own silence. This is what Jung began calling the mirror effect of the integrated healer. They didn't confront people directly. They didn't need to. Their mere presence reflected back the hidden truths others tried to avoid. Manipulators grew restless around them. People who once controlled them through guilt or obligation suddenly found their tactics useless. Without the healer's compliance, their games collapsed. But the mirror didn't only expose the toxic, it also illuminated the authentic. Healthy individuals felt drawn to these transformed healers with unusual trust. Patients reported feeling more understood in a single conversation than after years of therapy. Friends described them as grounding, almost magnetic, as if they carried a gravity that pulled others into honesty. Jung realized that the wounded healer, once integrated, carried a paradoxical influence. They destabilized dysfunction while simultaneously strengthening authenticity. Systems built on lies crumbled around them, while those built on truth thrived. Their transformation wasn't just personal resilience, it was social alchemy. And yet, this shift also carried danger. Jung admitted he was haunted by the possibility of what might happen if such individuals turned destructive. With their deep understanding of wounds, their ability to expose patterns, and their immunity to manipulation, they had the potential to dismantle not only toxic systems, but healthy ones as well. They could, if they chose, weaponize their gift. Most didn't. Jung noted that the majority of transformed healers used their power sparingly, with a kind of disciplined compassion. But he never dismissed the darker possibility. He wrote that society was unprepared for what it meant when the wounded healer stopped absorbing and started directing. For those around them, there was no middle ground. You either grew in their presence, or you fled from it. To Jung, the breaking of the wounded healer was never just a psychological event. It was archetypal. He connected it to one of humanity's oldest myths, Chiron, the immortal centaur who was both healer and eternally wounded. Chiron could mend the injuries of gods and mortals alike, yet he could never heal his own. For Jung, this myth was not a fable, but a mirror. It revealed a universal paradox. Those most skilled in easing suffering are often those who carry suffering the deepest. But what happens when Chiron refuses his fate? What happens when the healer stops tending everyone else's wounds and finally confronts his own? Jung believed this question carried enormous weight, not only for individuals, but for society as a whole. The danger lies in the healer's knowledge. Unlike ordinary people, They do not break in ignorance. They have studied pain, cataloged it, dissected it, lived within it. When their breaking comes, it is not a collapse into confusion, but a confrontation with truth. This is why Jung called it dangerous. It produces individuals who no longer accept illusions, who cannot be gaslit, who refuse to carry what is not theirs. They see through manipulation with startling clarity, and that vision can either heal communities or dismantle them. Jung also admitted he felt personally implicated in this archetype. He saw himself as a kind of wounded healer, a man whose insights into the unconscious were born not only of study, but of his own psychic fractures. His confrontation with his inner darkness, chronicled in the Red Book, mirrored the same pattern he saw in his patients. Breakdown, confrontation, integration. He knew from experience how thin the line could be between visionary and destroyer. Philosophically, the wounded healer reveals something about the human condition itself. Our wounds are not just weaknesses to be patched over. They are openings through which transformation enters. But transformation does not arrive gently. It comes in the form of rupture, the shattering of the persona we build to keep ourselves safe. For healers, that persona is selflessness. For them to evolve, it must crack. This is why Jung often said the task of individuation is not to become perfect, but whole. Wholeness requires the healer to stop identifying only with light, compassion, and service. It requires embracing shadow, anger, selfishness, even the right to walk away. Only by carrying both can they step into their true power. Yet Jung also saw the evolutionary potential in this archetype. He wrote that integrated healers might represent a new kind of human being, individuals who can face suffering without being consumed by it, who can hold power without abusing it. They are not saints and not martyrs. They are something rarer. People who have passed through the fire of their own wounds and emerged capable of wielding both compassion and strength without apology. For Jung, this was not just psychology. It was prophecy. Jung's final reflections on the wounded healer carry both a warning and a promise. What appears to the outside world as collapse is, in truth, the beginning of a new life cycle. The healer's breaking is not the end of their gift, but its transformation. For years, these individuals live in service to everyone else. They learn to silence their own needs, to override their exhaustion, to dismiss their intuition whenever it whispers, "You cannot carry this anymore." They are celebrated for their devotion, even sanctified for their sacrifice. But beneath that reverence lies a dangerous illusion that healers are inexhaustible. When that illusion shatters, when the healer finally reaches the point of rupture, it feels catastrophic. They walk away from families, resign from careers, or cut ties with lifelong friends. To the untrained eye, this looks like destruction. But Jung understood it differently. He wrote that the healer's breakdown is the psyche's way of forcing balance where none existed. It is not a collapse into nothingness. It is a collapse into truth. This is where empowerment begins. The healed healer does not return to their old role. They cannot. Once the shadow has been integrated, once boundaries have been drawn and honored, there is no going back to the endless giving that defined their earlier life. They become something new, a sovereign healer, still compassionate, still capable of extraordinary care, but no longer willing to offer it indiscriminately. Their energy is no longer consumed by those who exploit it. It is directed toward those who genuinely benefit from it, and toward themselves. Jung observed how this shift rippled into every dimension of their lives. Relationships that once drained them are replaced by ones that nourish them. Work that once depleted them becomes sustainable, even joyful. Health improves, creativity returns, and a sense of inner solidity emerges. For the first time, these individuals are not defined by the wounds of others, but by the wholeness they have claimed within themselves. And with this wholeness comes power. The sovereign healer carries an authority that cannot be faked. They no longer need validation from others to confirm their worth. They no longer seek approval for their boundaries. Their presence alone communicates strength, not the strength of domination, but the strength of someone who has walked through devastation and survived. People sense it. Manipulators recoil, while those hungry for truth feel magnetically drawn to them. This is what Jung found most remarkable. The wounded healer's greatest gift emerges only after the break. Before, their compassion was boundless but unsustainable. After, their compassion is paired with discernment, and that combination makes them nearly untouchable. They can still walk into darkness, but they no longer get lost in it. They can still witness pain, but they no longer absorb it until they drown. They can still heal, but they do so without erasing themselves. Jung believed this evolution was not accidental. It was archetypal, a built-in process of the human psyche, waiting for the right catalyst. The breaking point, painful as it is, functions like an initiation. It strips the healer of illusions, burns away false obligations, and leaves only what is essential. Out of that fire emerges someone who is not just a caretaker, but a guide, not just a healer of wounds, but a living example of what integration looks like. The empowerment lies in choice. The healer who has broken can choose how to wield their gift. They can continue to offer compassion, but now it flows with precision and purpose. They can protect their energy, guard their boundaries, and honor their own wounds as sacred teachers rather than shameful weaknesses. They can become not only effective healers of others, but guardians of their own wholeness. And that is what Jung believed society most needed. Not martyrs who sacrifice themselves endlessly, but integrated healers who model what it means to live with both tenderness and strength. For when the wounded healer rises from their breaking, they do not simply recover. They redefine what healing itself means. Jung left us with a haunting insight. The breaking of the wounded healer is not a tragedy. It is an initiation. It is the point where sacrifice ends and sovereignty begins. If you are someone who has carried everyone else's pain, if you have lived your life as the strong one, the reliable one, the one who never falters, then you already know the cost of that role. You know what it feels like to be praised for your strength while silently collapsing inside. The question is not whether the wounded healer will break. The question is when. And more importantly, what will rise after the breaking? So I leave you with this. If you've ever felt your breaking point approaching, if you've ever sensed that the role you play is costing you your soul, remember Jung's warning and his hope. The wounded healer's journey is not about endless giving. It is about transformation. Comment below if you felt that shift. From being consumed by everyone else's wounds to finally honoring your own. Right. I am the sovereign healer. because the world doesn't need more broken healers. It needs awakened ones. And maybe, just maybe, that awakening begins with you.